They gave my sister $10 million and told me to survive alone. I'm Emily, the mistake of the family. But when Grandpa passed, he left behind a letter that changed everything. Would you have walked away or built a legacy from scratch? Let me know below. I always knew my parents favored Rachel, but nothing prepared me for the moment they called me the family's mistake. The word carried the sting of final judgment, a label I'd felt pressed against my skin since childhood, but hearing it said out loud left me hollow in a way I couldn't easily explain. My grandfather Charles used to whisper something different into my ear when no one was listening. "One day, Emily, you'll see what real legacy means." At the time, I never understood. I thought he was just being kind, balancing the scales when my parents tilted everything toward Rachel. Now, his words came back to me with more weight than I could bear, echoing in the quiet corners of my memory like a promise waiting to be revealed. Life in Brooklyn looked nothing like the polished existence of my family in Boston. My apartment was small, a shoebox crammed with paintbrushes, canvases half-finished, and mugs of cold coffee scattered like trophies of my restless nights. The radiator hissed every few minutes, adding its own rhythm to my days, while the walls carried the faint smell of turpentine and takeout Thai food. I worked 2 jobs to keep it all afloat. Mornings behind the counter of a coffee shop where I memorized regulars' orders. Large iced oat latte, no sugar for the young guy with wire glasses, plain black drip for the old writer with trembling hands, and evenings at a cramped gallery in the Lower East Side where I hung other people's work and tried not to let envy choke me. Between shifts, I painted, knowing that most of my canvases would end up stacked against the wall, waiting for someone to believe in me. Still, I told myself I was surviving. That had to count for something. But whenever I stepped back into my parents' world, survival wasn't enough. The Carter Mansion in Beacon Hill always smelled faintly of lemon polish and roasted meats. That night, I arrived carrying a bottle of red wine I couldn't afford, dressed in my best thrift store blazer, already bracing for the small humiliations I knew were coming. The dining room gleamed with mahogany wood and silverware, polished so brightly it nearly blinded me. My mother, Linda, swept in with her silk blouse perfectly pressed, her smile sharp as glass. Rachel sat beside her, posture flawless, a delicate gold bracelet catching the light as she reached for her wine glass. She looked like she belonged in a magazine spread, the successful daughter, the one my parents could parade with pride. Dinner began the way it always did. My father, Richard, carved the roast beef with slow precision, his jaw tight as though even food had to obey his authority. He asked Rachel about her new position at the consulting firm, and she launched into a well-rehearsed description of her promotion, sprinkling her words with terms like strategic growth and client expansion. They lapped it up, nodding, smiling, clinking glasses. When it was my turn, I tried to share about the gallery. I mentioned the upcoming exhibition featuring emerging artists, how it was gaining local press attention. Richard's mouth twisted into a half-smile, half-sneer. "A gallery?" he said, slicing into his roast. "So you're still wasting time hanging up other people's doodles?" The words landed heavier than I wanted them to. My cheeks burned, and I glanced at Rachel, who smirked softly behind her glass. My mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, pretending not to notice. I forced a laugh, brittle and thin. "It's more than that, Dad. It's about giving voices to artists who don't—" "Voices don't pay rent," he interrupted, setting down his knife with a sharp clink. "At some point, Emily, you'll have to grow up." The table went quiet. I stared at the roast beef cooling on my plate, its smell mixing with the sting of shame. Then, under the table, I felt a warm hand squeeze mine. Grandpa Charles, sitting beside me, gave me the smallest nod. His eyes, soft and knowing, held me for just a moment, and then he whispered almost too quietly to hear, "Legacy, Emily. Remember." That single word steadied me, even as my parents' laughter turned back toward Rachel. Later, as I cleared my plate and excused myself, I passed the study where I heard their voices carrying through the cracked door. My father's deep timbre, my mother's silky reply. "You are the future, Rachel," Richard said. "Emily will have to survive on her own." My stomach knotted. I pressed my back against the wall, listening, the truth slicing sharper than any knife. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was declaration. The train ride back to Brooklyn rattled with the usual squeaks and groans, fluorescent lights flickering above, but everything felt unreal. I watched my reflection in the darkened window, my face pale and tired, my eyes hollow. Around me, strangers dozed, headphones in, the city rushing by. I thought of Rachel's perfect smile, my parents' certainty, and Grandpa's whisper that clung to me like a fragile shield. I made it home, tossed my thrift store blazer onto the couch, and let the quiet swallow me. My canvases leaned against the wall, waiting. I touched one absent-mindedly, my fingertips tracing the ridges of paint, wondering if this was all I would ever be. Scraps of effort, pieces of work that no one cared to see. Then, just as sleep threatened to pull me under, my phone buzzed. The screen glowed with Edward's name, my older brother who rarely called. My stomach tightened before I even answered. His voice was low, strained. "Emily, Grandpa's gone." I froze, the silence between us heavier than the subway's roar, heavier than my father's dismissal. The world shifted beneath me, and for the first time that night, tears filled my eyes. They buried the only person who ever believed in me on a gray April morning in Boston. The sky hung low, swollen with clouds, and the air smelled of damp earth and lilacs wilting against polished caskets. I stood near the back of the historic churchyard, my umbrella trembling in the drizzle, watching as the priest's words dissolved into the soft hiss of rain. Grandpa Charles had always been the anchor in a family that otherwise treated me like driftwood. Now, even that anchor was gone. His last words haunted me. "This is your legacy, not theirs." I wanted to believe him, but as I watched my parents and Rachel take their places front and center, I couldn't help but feel the distance, physical and otherwise. Rachel wore a fitted black dress, elegant even in mourning, her husband Mark at her side. My parents sat stiffly, Linda dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, while Richard stared forward as though emotion was beneath him. I shifted on my damp heels, the mud sucking faintly at the ground beneath me. My hands smelled faintly of the umbrella's metal, and I thought about how Grandpa's hand once felt, warm, steady, squeezing mine beneath a dinner table crowded with silver and judgment. Now there was no hand, only the drizzle collecting on my sleeves. When the service ended, the mourners shuffled under a sea of black umbrellas toward the reception at the Carter mansion. I followed reluctantly, every step up Beacon Hill's cobblestones feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the drawing room buzzed with murmurs. Platters of tea sandwiches, glossy pastries, and steaming coffee urns stood untouched on linen-draped tables. I recognized most of the faces, family friends who still referred to Rachel as the pride of the Carters. They nodded politely at me, then turned away quickly, their conversations lowering into a hum I wasn't meant to hear. I found a corner near the mantel, cradling a lukewarm cup of coffee. The bitter taste clung to my tongue, but it gave me something to hold besides my grief. Around me, the whispers grew sharper. Charles had quite the estate, didn't he? They say he left behind 10 million, maybe more. Well, of course Rachel will inherit. She's the one who made something of herself. The words stung, not because I hadn't expected them, but because they were said so casually, as though I wasn't standing right there. Near the doorway, I spotted Jonathan Pierce, the family lawyer. His navy suit looked almost too crisp for the rain-soaked day. He was speaking quietly with my parents, their heads tilted close, expressions taut. I tried to pretend I wasn't listening, but their words floated easily across the room. "Make sure there are no surprises," Richard murmured. Pierce gave a quick nod, his voice low. "Everything will be handled properly, sir." My chest tightened. No surprises. The phrase stuck as if they already feared something hidden, something Grandpa might have done without their blessing. I tried to slip past unnoticed, but Rachel intercepted me near the pastry table. She didn't even look tired from the funeral. If anything, she seemed energized, as though grief only highlighted her perfection. She leaned close, her perfume sharp and floral. "Don't expect anything, Emily," she whispered, her lips curving into a practiced smirk. "Father always said you had to stand on your own." I forced a swallow, the coffee burning down my throat. "You don't know what Grandpa wanted." Rachel tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "I know exactly what he wanted, and it wasn't you." Her words were sugar-coated venom, but before I could respond, a firm voice cut through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pierce announced, standing near the grand piano, his glasses catching the chandelier's light. "The will reading will take place tomorrow morning in Mr. Carter's study, here at the mansion. Attendance will be limited to immediate family." A hush fell. My mother clasped Rachel's hand as if securing her claim. My father adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw set. I stood still, pulse racing, caught between fear and a strange flicker of hope. Then Rachel leaned close again, her whisper slicing through the quiet like a blade. 10 million is just the beginning. Her words lingered in my ear as the room's chatter resumed, the scent of rain clinging to black coats, the taste of bitter coffee refusing to fade. I suddenly felt colder than I had at the cemetery. Rachel's whisper hints at stakes far larger than Emily imagined. My sister's smile widened as the lawyer read her name, and my world collapsed with a single sentence. Morning light slipped through the drapes in Granddad's study, laying pale ladders across the rug. The room smelled of lemon oil and paper. Oak shelves climbed to the ceiling, leather chairs breathed when anyone shifted, and above the desk hung my old mixed media piece in its stubborn black frame. I'd made it in Brooklyn with cheap glue and an empty stomach. Grandpa bought it quietly and hung it here as if to say, "I saw you." Jonathan Pierce cleared his throat. His voice had the calm grain of varnished wood. "We'll begin with the smaller bequests," he said, and paper whispered softly. "A trust for the housekeeper, college funds for the driver's grandkids, donations to the library, the hospital arts program, the Veterans Center." I clung to those lines. Across from me, Rachel sat queen straight, one ankle tucked, heels pressing neat half-moons in the rug. Richard rested both hands on a cane he didn't need. Linda touched an eye that wasn't wet. Mark leaned toward Rachel. Proprietary. Edward Grant, Granddad's oldest friend, watched from the far chair with winter-worn eyes. Pierce flipped a page. "To my granddaughter, Rachel Carter Whitman, I bequeath the sum of $10 million to be used as she deems appropriate to continue the Carter legacy." Rachel inhaled like someone remembering to look modest. My parents beamed in matching approval. Mark's thumb circled Rachel's bracelet as if polishing it. The words told, 10 million, continue the legacy, and the grandfather clock tapped on with its tidy tick. I kept my gaze on the crooked edge of my painting, pride and hunger sealed there. Pierce turned another page. "To my granddaughter, Emily Carter," my breath snagged, "I leave a letter." Silence lay between the chairs. A letter. So small a thing, and yet it crushed. Linda's shoulders loosened with private relief. Rachel angled toward me, the corner of her mouth lifting like a hook. Mark's hand stayed where it was. Richard spoke in the voice he used for earnings calls. "Rachel has earned 10 million. Emily will have to survive alone." There it was, the phrase I had heard through walls and years, now set on the table like good silver. I felt the blood in my ears trying to beat the clock. My palms slicked. I hid them in my lap and studied a hangnail I'd worried raw. Leather smelled closer, as if the chairs were listening. "Jonathan?" Linda asked sweetly. "Is there anything else?" Pierce looked down, then up. "Yes, there are private instructions for Ms. Emily Carter. Mr. Charles Carter directed that these be delivered to her alone." Richard's jaw tightened. "Absurd. I'm the head of this family." "It's also legal," Pierce replied, crisp as a deed, "and binding. I'll need everyone but Emily to step into the hall." Rachel gave a short laugh. "Why would Grandpa keep secrets from us?" Edward's voice rasped from the end. "Because he knew how you'd behave." Richard rose, cane tapping the rug for show. "We will be discussing this." "I expect you will," Pierce said. "Outside, please." No one moved. The clock went on, calm and civilized. Linda stood first, smoothing immaculate fabric. Mark followed. Rachel lingered long enough to exhale perfume at me. "Don't get comfortable," she murmured. "A letter can't change what you are." I kept my eyes on the painting to keep my voice steady. Finally, the door closed and the study exhaled. We were three: the lawyer, the friend, and the girl invited to disappear. Pierce bent to his briefcase. Brass latches clicked like gavels. He drew out a thick cream envelope with my name, Emily, inked in my grandfather's careful hand. The sight of those letters emptied the room. My heart drummed, louder than the clock. "It's from him," Pierce said gently. Edward nodded once. I took the envelope. The paper was weighty, beveled at the edge. The wax seal slit where Pierce had verified it. My fingers shook. I pressed the packet to my sternum before I could stop, as if I might absorb the ink into me. On the other side of the door, voices rose. Richard low, Linda clipped, Rachel brittle. The clock chimed the half hour, warm as metal. "Take your time," Pierce said. "When you're ready, we'll talk." I breathed the way I do over a latte, 4 counts in and out. My hands steadied. I looked down at my name again. The downstroke on the E was darker, so I wouldn't miss it. I slid a thumb beneath the flap, then paused. I thought of roast beef I couldn't swallow, polished silver, and the way survival had been offered like a lesson and not a life. I thought of glue that buckled, and of the day he hung my proof where everyone would have to see. The knob rattled. Someone tested the door. I startled and clutched the envelope tighter, the paper warming under my skin. Pierce waited, composed, a steady harbor. Edward's eyes held a shine like winter before it admits spring. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Carter," Pierce said. I nodded, holding the letter like a lifeline, while the old clock counted down another thin slice of time, and the rest of the house rustled with impatience I no longer intended to inherit. The room emptied, and for the first time, the weight of my grandfather's secrets fell entirely on me. The air shifted, as if the furniture exhaled. Sunlight filtered in through the heavy curtains, pooling on the hardwood floor and illuminating dust motes like tiny golden bodies rising above the silence. The smell of old paper and polished wood wrapped around me in a way that felt like a memory and like a promise. I stood near the desk, the bland bustle beyond the study door muffled now to a quiet hum. Jonathan Pierce closed the door with a soft click, then leaned forward and placed something on the desk. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. Next to it lay a heavy brass key, its surface cold and smooth under my fingertips when I picked it up. The metal felt reassuring and cold, like the kind of kindness that demands responsibility. "This," Pierce said gently, "is for you." My fingers trembled as I lifted the envelope and the room tilted. I remembered Grandpa's voice, warm and secret, saying, "Legacy isn't money, Emily, it's what you build." That phrase echoed behind my eyes, softening the panic fluttering inside me. I broke the seal and gently pulled out the letter. The handwriting was my grandfather's, his careful stroke curling around my name. My breath hitched as I read, "My dearest Emily." And then a list unfolded, a private collection of contemporary art, years of carefully curated pieces, from mixed media collages to watercolors, each infused with something I recognized: ambition, longing, hope. An entire art collection. A townhouse on Beacon Hill, 3 stories tall with a gallery on the ground floor and living quarters above just for me, where I could paint or host shows. And a trust with $25 million to support the gallery and pay rent, insurance, studio supplies, everything to launch my own legacy. My vision of him, stern businessman, silent patriarch, fractured when I thought of him maneuvering quietly in the background, building this hidden world for me. I sat on the edge of a leather chair, hands shaking around the letter. The smells of lemon oil and old books gave the space a cathedral kind of gravity. I heard Jonathan clear his throat and looked up. He said, "The will is airtight. Your family may protest, but legally, this is set." His eyes didn't apologize, but I felt the steadiness of someone who promised he'd seen it through. Then, to my surprise, Edward appeared in the doorway, cane in one hand, the other summoned to my shoulder. His face, lined with age and loyalty, gave me a courage I didn't know I had. "Charles always believed you'd carry his heart," Edward said quietly. That phrase settled me. Grandpa's old friend was right. I could feel him in both the letter and Edward's words. It wasn't about money. It was his faith distilled into policy and paint and architecture. Pierce cleared throat softly, breaking the moment. "I must warn you," he said. "Your family may push back, but this estate was structured with foresight. Grandpa protected your inheritance from dispute." I nodded. The word protected felt good, sharp-edged like a blade I could hold against doubt. My gaze drifted to the desk's inlaid wood pattern. A seam caught my eye, too neat to be decoration. My fingertips traced it. The wood shifted like a boundary. I pressed gently, and it popped open. Inside was a small display plaque carved from brass, Evelyn's Gallery, my grandmother's name. The words glowed in the shaft of sunlight. I ran my finger along the letters, feeling both heat and cold, legacy finally tangible. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse into tears or laughter. Maybe both. The gallery, not just any gallery, but one named after the grandmother who painted watercolors in the backyard, whose quiet art had inspired me. Then, I heard the muffled voices outside, and the study door rattled the way someone jabbed at it until someone let them in. Rachel's voice, sharp and demanding, rose. "What is in that envelope? Tell me." I almost dropped the brass key. the harsh, invasive whisper cracked my sense of safety. The sunlight shifted behind me, and for the first time I understood that this inheritance wasn't just mine. It was a challenge and a responsibility. I held the envelope and the plaque close, their weight steady in my hands. The room, once empty, felt full with promise, and with the crossroads where my life would change. Money didn't erase my parents' scorn, but it gave me a canvas wide enough to paint a new life. By June, the old townhouse on Beacon Hill had become my second skin. Dust clung to every surface, the air reeked of plaster and sawdust, and sunlight sliced through the slats of newly installed windows like paint strokes across a canvas. I spent mornings crouched on ladders, roller in hand, and afternoons huddled with Julia Reynolds, curator, mentor, and the only person besides Grandpa who spoke to me like I wasn't invisible. Julia had been Charles' longtime collaborator at the Boston Museum of Art. When I reached out, she didn't hesitate. "He'd be proud," she'd said, her fingers grazing a framed ink sketch from his collection. "But more importantly, you should be." Our partnership was effortless. She understood my vision, not just a space to hang pretty pictures, but a sanctuary for artists who'd been dismissed like I had. We didn't rush. Every choice was deliberate. The walls were repainted in soft cream to catch natural light. I chose the lighting fixtures myself, industrial brass sconces that gave the room a warmth museum galleries never quite captured. Some afternoons blurred into evenings. I'd arrive early with iced lattes from a corner shop down on Tremont, hair tied up, jeans smeared with paint. Julia would already be inside, sleeves rolled up, poring over layout mock-ups. She'd laugh at how I always added one more frame or candle or color swatch. "Artists," she'd smirk, never satisfied with negative space. And I wasn't. Not anymore. For the first time, I had something of my own. Grandpa had trusted me with more than money. He had handed me a future. It didn't stop my parents from trying. One week in July, a formal letter arrived. My parents were contesting the will. Their lawyer argued I had unduly influenced Charles in his final months. The idea would have been laughable if it didn't sting so much. They hadn't even called after the funeral, but they'd hire a man in a suit to erase the only real love I'd ever known. Jonathan Pierce handled it. "It's posturing," he told me. "They're hoping you'll be rattled." I wasn't. Not this time. By the end of July, the court rejected their claim. Grandpa's documents had been too thorough, his intentions too clear. And yet, I still wasn't prepared for Rachel. She came unannounced. The gallery was still under renovation, walls half done, saws whining from the back room, drop cloths scattered like sails. I was on my knees, smoothing the edge of a framed canvas when I looked up and saw her standing by the door, arms folded, eyes unreadable. She wore heels that sank slightly into the unfinished floor, and a silk blouse that looked out of place among the paint-splattered tarps. I stood slowly. "What are you doing here?" I asked, brushing my hands on my jeans. Rachel looked around the room like she was appraising it for resale. Her eyes lingered on a painting of Grandma Evelyn's garden, one I had found in the attic and restored myself. "So this is what he left you," she said finally. "A museum no one asked for." My fist tightened at my sides. "He left me a legacy. You wouldn't understand." She smiled, not cruelly, just tired. "Do you even know how to handle that kind of money?" Her voice trembled just slightly, but she masked it well. I looked her in the eye. "I know how to honor him. That's enough." We stood there, two women shaped by the same house but different kinds of love. Her power had always been presence, center stage at dinners, loudest voice at holidays, the perfect child. Mine had been absence, quiet corners, sketch pads, learning to exist without approval. Rachel didn't reply. She turned slowly, heels clicking against hardwood, and walked out. But something had cracked. I saw it, just for a second, when her voice wavered. Something deeper than envy. Maybe regret. By August, the gallery was nearly finished. We held a private press preview on a warm Saturday morning. A few Boston art critics came, drawn more by Julia's name than mine, but they left intrigued. One whispered to me near the exhibit of Grandpa's sketches, "This feels personal, almost like a love letter." It was. My parents didn't show. They sent no message, no congratulations, no denial, just silence. But the silence no longer swallowed me. That night, alone in the upstairs studio apartment Grandpa had designed for me, I lit a candle and placed a photograph of us, me at age 7, him kneeling beside a crude crayon drawing on the desk. That was the first time he ever called me artist. And now I had an entire building to prove he'd meant it. Just before bed, a letter arrived. Hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a short note in Rachel's handwriting. Let's talk, on my terms this time. No threats, no posturing. Just 7 words. But they carried more weight than I was ready for. A year after they told me to survive alone, I opened the doors to a place that carried my name. Fall had swept through Boston with its usual elegance, scarlet leaves drifting along cobblestone streets, pumpkin wreaths on brownstone doors, the kind of crisp air that made you crave cinnamon and quiet. But the quiet inside Evelyn's gallery tonight was different, alive with murmurs, camera shutters, the gentle clink of champagne glasses. The plaque gleamed just outside the front doors. Evelyn's Gallery, in memory of Charles Carter. Below, in smaller script, founded by Emily Carter, 2024. Inside, a delicate hum of strings floated through hidden speakers. Grandpa's sketches lined the first exhibit room, inked portraits, still lifes, and one of his final paintings, an old wooden swing bathed in morning light. My own canvases hung in the rear chamber, abstract works inspired by the subway sketches he once praised in secret. Julia stood near the champagne table in a navy dress that made her silver hair look like moonlight. She caught my eye across the room and nodded, lifting her glass just slightly, our silent signal that all the months of grit and grief had bloomed into something real. The gallery was full, local patrons, press, even students from the art college across town. Edward was there too, leaning on his cane, tracing one of Grandpa's signatures with the reverence of a man touching memory. For a brief moment, I stood alone by the window, watching the warm light of the gallery spill onto the sidewalk like a hearth. Then Julia tapped a fork against her glass. "I won't speak long," she said, smiling, "because this space already speaks louder than I could. Tonight, we honor legacy, not just the past, but what we choose to build from it." Charles believed in voices that weren't always heard. Emily has become one of those voices, and now she's created a home for many more. Applause scattered like autumn leaves. I blinked back tears, unsure if they belonged to pride or grief or both. People began to drift again. Conversations resumed. But in the lull between laughter and wine refills, I noticed someone slip in through the side entrance. Silent, composed, the familiar silhouette of my sister. Rachel. Her black coat was buttoned neatly, her heels quieter than memory. She moved through the gallery without speaking, her gaze pausing at each frame like she was walking through someone else's dream. I didn't approach her. She found me. I stood near the painting of Grandpa Charles holding a young girl's sketch pad, a moment I'd recreated from an old Polaroid. Her eyes met mine in front of it. "He really believed in you," she said softly. I nodded. "He believed in both of us. You just never listened." She didn't flinch. Her jaw tensed slightly, then relaxed. There was no apology. Rachel Carter never apologized. But there was something else. Not regret, not guilt, just a flicker of understanding, maybe even respect. "You did it," she said. And then she left. No cruel smile, no mocking remark, no need to reclaim the room. She simply turned and stepped back into the October night, swallowed by rustling leaves and amber streetlight. That, in its own way, was the apology I never thought I'd get. Later that night, after the last guests had gone and Julia had kissed my cheek goodbye, I stood alone in the gallery's main hall. The lights dimmed to a glow. I walked slowly to the wall where the plaque hung and ran my fingers over its engraving. Evelyn's Gallery. My grandmother's name, my grandfather's heart, my hands. I remembered the words he whispered once when I thought he was asleep in his chair. "One day, Emily, you'll see what real legacy means." I finally did. Legacy wasn't cash or property. It wasn't trust funds or newspaper clippings. It was what you left behind that made people feel something, seen, inspired, safe. It was creating space for others when no one gave you any. Outside, a breeze tugged gently at the gallery's glass door. I stepped out onto the stoop, the cold stone grounding me. Across the street, a little girl clutched her mother's hand and pointed to the sign above the door. I smiled. "They gave Rachel $10 million. I whispered to the night. "They told me to survive alone." I looked back at the light spilling from the windows. And yet here I stand, not surviving, but living. They said I had to survive alone, but in the quiet light of Evelyn's Gallery, I finally understood. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living with purpose. Sometimes family doesn't come through bloodlines or approval. It comes from those who see your worth when no one else does. And when we choose grace over resentment, we build something far greater than inheritance. We build legacy. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear what legacy means in your life. Feel free to share your thoughts below, because maybe, just maybe, your story deserves to be seen too.